Start now. So a very, very warm welcome to you all on this chilly Melbourne morning, but wherever you're joining us from, you're most welcome. I'm Virginia Birrell, the CEO of ACBC Victoria and Tasmania, and we welcome all our members from Victoria and Tasmania and indeed around Australia online today and from overseas. I'll commence by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are traditional owners of these lands, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging right around Australia from the places where our online audience is joining us today. I'm excited to welcome you all to the second Strategic China Briefing for 2022. Partnering with Global Victoria, we invited leaders in their field to share their experience and advice on navigating the dynamic China market. And dynamic it is. Australia-China engagement is slowly evolving as emerging green industries and investments become the focus of trade. And as you'll know, it's on the news today in relation to the climate change areas in which China and Australia can work. ACBC is on the front foot of this energy transition with a Green Channel initiative supporting businesses as they decarbonise, helping Australia and China achieve net zero faster together. Our speaker today is a pioneer in this field in his own unique way. Dylan Brady is the owner of Decibel Architecture, a highly valued member of ACBC community. Today, Dylan will talk about his extensive project experience in China, including a discussion on the SCG 0+, China's highest rated sustainable building and first 5.0 building. I'm sure Dylan will elaborate on the importance of his approach and philosophy during his presentation. A reminder that today's session will not be recorded, so please take notes as you go. Please feel free also to put any questions in the Q&A box for Dylan to respond to at the end of the session. Before we hear from Dylan, I'd like to welcome the Victorian Government's Deputy Commissioner for Greater China, Nick Henderson, to provide opening remarks. Nick and his team in China has been assisting Victorian businesses in the market with great expertise and care. We've thoroughly enjoyed our partnership with Global Victoria on this series and thank Nick and his team for their support. Over to you, Nick. Thanks.
Thanks, Virginia, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to provide a few remarks for today's event. And I echo Virginia's sentiments, and it's been a pleasure also working with ACBC on this series. Global Victoria is very pleased to be supporting this ACBC Victoria Strategic China Briefing Series as part of our Global Victoria Trade Alliance program. These events, as Virginia mentioned, feature leading Victorian experts in their field, discussing a range of issues related to China's contemporary environment. China's economic development over the past 40 years has been nothing short of a miracle. At the beginning of China's opening up and reform in 1979, urbanisation rates were less than 20%. Today, it stands just shy of 65%. For some time now, China has been grappling with the consequences of this urbanisation, the resultant massive economic and industrial growth, pressure on infrastructure, utilities, manufacturing, transportation, how society is structured, how people live, and most critically, impacts on the natural environment. In order to address elements of these challenges, China has an ambitious strategy backed by policy and investment to improve the environment and develop low carbon and zero carbon design as its cities evolve and reshape for the future. These are in line with China's global commitment to reach peak CO2 emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060. This is an absolutely huge task, which will take a concerted effort and the skills and experience of world-leading designers. Leading Victorian design firm Decibel, owned by our guest today, are playing a real role in this transition with projects like the Landsea Shanghai Green Centre and SCG 0+, also in Shanghai. Decibel has been doing business in China for quite some time and has a depth of project and market experience. I won't go into any more of the details and leave that for Dylan to share that with you. Victoria has a leading design sector with core strengths in livability, sustainable design, and building world-class urban spaces that have evolved Melbourne into being one of the most livable cities in the world. We have many leading design firms with a large number of projects in China covering urban design, interior design, master planning, precinct design, water-sensitive urban design, and placemaking. The Victorian Government, through its 5 offices in Greater China, supports the development of these opportunities through trade facilitation work and engagement with both local Chinese project stakeholders and the urban design and livability sector. I'm sure that you'll find Dylan's insights today of real interest, including insights into some of the leading design work and projects that he and the Decibel team are working on in China and beyond. Thank you. Back to you, Virginia.
Thanks so much, Nick. That's a good overview. Now we welcome Dylan, owner and operator of Decibel Architecture, and we're very much looking forward to your presentation, Dylan. So over to you. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you, Virginia. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. As to being the owner and operator of Decibel Architecture, that makes it sound a bit like a tractor. I call myself the conductor. My job really is to wave my arms around a lot, make sure everybody plays their instruments on time and on tune and together. Nick and Virginia have spoken very highly of quite a lot of the projects that we've done through China over the years. We started working in China in 2008, and in 2008 we won in an international competition the facade for the new Suzhou Science and Cultural Arts Centre. I'm not going to go into very much detail on any of the previous projects other than to give you a little bit of context around perhaps the shifting emphasis of international design and its role in China and the way it works. We started in China very much on a hyper aesthetic kind of super rationalized cultural band, if you will, creating identity, creating places, differentiating cities that could otherwise be lost in a homogeneity. And this Suzhou Science and Cultural Arts Centre really set the bar for us and for a number of other projects around creation of an identity using a very simple but detailed and complex relationship between patterns and lines. Our team here at Decibel is deeply multicultural. We hark from not only Southeast Asia but Europe and beyond, and we work together in a building that we were lucky enough to design for some future person who would be highly blessed. This is the Pixel building that I'm in today and that we use as our headquarters. It's located in Melbourne, and it was built and designed in 2006, completed in 2009. It's a demonstration green building, and we're getting quite good at doing these. Sadly, this project is still the world's highest rated LEED building, and it's still the world's highest rated Green Star building, and it's still the world's highest rated international BREEAM building. And whilst we've had quite some number of tallest buildings in the world since this building was built, we still sit on the top of, yes, a very growing pile, but we're still at the top end of performance there. This building provided the opportunity for us and for the Victorian government and through what is now Global Victoria to run a series of lectures and exposures to some of the great science and the great engineering that was going on here in Victoria in particular, but also Australia-wide. And this building is essentially, it was pitched as a very small building from which big things might come. We know as architects and designers that we can't really change the environment, the world, one single building at a time, but we are able, if we build buildings that change the rules by which all other buildings are built, to affect all other buildings. And so pushing beyond the boundaries of what you would normally do, striving to achieve an overlap between the very best rating tools and determining things that work, and very importantly, and possibly even more importantly, things that don't work, are critical to that. This is not a lecture about Pixel, but I will say that Pixel was the shining lure that drew the Shanghai construction group to Melbourne when we were talking to them about tall buildings as part of the Tall Buildings Advisory Group under the Australian Urban Systems team that exists under the Victorian government. So thank you to the Victorian government for your investments in those trade missions and time. Pixel Building is a wonderful home. We know the things that work, we know the things that perhaps could be better, and we also know how to design a greener building than this building is today. So whilst it might be at the top of the pile, it's definitely not yet what I would call the most sustainable building. It may very well be the highest rated, but we know that things can be done better. We took everything we learnt doing this project back to China and put it onto steroids really with this project here for the government of Wujin, which is the southern district of Changzhou in Jiangsu province, which is our sister state. Its capital is Nanjing, which lots of people may have heard of, but in this kind of burgeoning city space that Nick mentioned before, Wujin was the southern district of Changzhou, a mere 5 million people here. And so whilst it's the same amount of population we had in Victoria at the time, this was sort of seen as a nowhere. They had a great desire to make places and bring culture to bear. This is a project that's across 65,000 square metres. We won it in 2009 and they finished building it in 2012, which is a remarkable period of time to build such a substantial project. It's got a 10-storey school in it here at the front, so we're only now starting in the last year and a half or so to build vertical schools in Victoria. Vertical schools have been a part of the Chinese ecology of thinking for quite some time. And we put into this building everything we'd learned here on Pixel. This has as a building would, had we scored it in LEED, potentially even beaten Pixel. We have a massive built-in photovoltaics, solar systems, daylight. We've got a grand theatre for 1,000 people. As I said, a school for 4,000 students. We've got sports halls, cinemas. We've got commercial areas and an art gallery, as well as a whole raft of public facility spaces. The client, as the government there, loved what we'd done on this project so much, they subsequently invited us, as happens in China, to collaborate again on another project immediately across the road, which is the sort of the planning centre for the city, and this is the Wujin Lotus. The planning department at the time had built this kind of artificial lake, and it had a sort of a glass box on it, and they weren't really excited. We designed this project for them, which was quite an extraordinary culture maker. It became a driver of economic value because the government owned all of the towers around and everybody loved this building, and the value of all of the properties went up. And this particular city now is a place that's becoming quite famous on and around February the 14th, with lots of booked out hotels, because people like to come here and get married and propose to one another, and kind of gives this place some purpose and some character. The challenge that we were working with on SCG 0 Plus, which is what I'm going to start talking about now, was this idea that we could beat Pixel, that we could start again with the technologies that are vastly more sophisticated, and with the knowledge that we had on building a building that would really establish a pathway for Chinese construction and for the complex and extremely strict rules of China to be woven into an ESD-driven project as a demonstration office building. We found, and we continue to find, that in China you need to touch base not just on numbers and math and engineering and science, but on culture and on stories and on poetry and on deep connections to the landscapes that perhaps not all of us here in Australia are aware of being in China, there are some of the most incredible landscapes on the planet in China, and being able to weave people back to nature, to connect people to nature again, I think is a massive challenge. So we tried to establish this project very much as a kind of a metaphor for life, a complex, ordered and symbiotic relationship between all of the components that we live, work and build within, in order to make those form a tapestry, something that had more harmony to it. This project set out to achieve the world's most exemplary status in sustainability. We really wanted to make sure that in order to do that, this project was seen as one that would live, one that would communicate, that would celebrate the seasons, that would work with the natural world, that was an opportunity to educate people about how connected they are to nature, where things come from, where they go, and what are those complex and subtle rhythms. So at a super level, a super high level, we were really about trying to tell this story. This was a carbon neutral, but also like a multi-zero demonstration park, which became part of the brief after we were looking at this project, showing the world how to achieve China's 2060 carbon neutrality goal. It was a real driver for us. It was an eye-opener, because as we were starting to talk, we've been talking about this project for about 5 years, and it was only as we just started this project that Xi Jinping announced that carbon neutrality target in 2060. So it was a massive benefit for the client and for us to actually really know that we were on the right track. For us, we called it Zero Plus because we're really interested in how we might achieve more than just zero. Carbon neutrality is a moment in time where you're offsetting carbon, offsetting carbon, offsetting carbon. You're neutral at a point, and then you become positive. And so we wanted to really understand how would we become a project that could take all of these streams, these energy streams, water streams, people streams, the food waste and materials, and get them all to perform as efficiently as possible. So looking at energy, how are we harvesting from nature, and how do we return to nature? Because obviously energy is not created or destroyed, it's simply shifted from one form to another. Water, the fundamental truth that water, there's no new water. All the water that we drink has been cleaned and filtered and recycled through the planet for millions of years. There's not like even this water that I'm drinking here today was probably once the blood of a dinosaur. So we like to keep that kind of geological timescale to some of these elements, which comes back to this notion of waste. There is no way to which we can throw things. Everything has to be seen as having an inherent value, an inherent energy, an embodied energy within it. And so we need to think of our waste as opportunities, not as something to be got rid of. And materials, of course, coming back. Energy cannot be created and destroyed, but merely transformed. It's true with materials. Bamboos, rapidly recyclable, renewable materials, aluminium, steel, the concretes that we use, the aggregates and the mixtures that we use in those concretes, the limes that we have to put into an arc furnace. Where does the energy come from that powers the arc furnace to make the lime? Thinking through all of these components. What's the fuel in the digger that digs the hole for us to use? And then obviously this idea of sequestration or embodiment. How do we make sure that we weave the excess carbon that's currently in the air? How can we weave that back into the fabric of the planet? How can we actually own it and control it and take it out of circulation from the parts per million? And then of course, people. You know, we are all people in nature, and it's the nature of people that sometimes really pushes us. As with all projects that we've done in China, you go through a lot of versions. There's a lot of minds to keep happy. There's a lot of agendas at play. I'm going to show you now a slide that kind of takes you very quickly through the panoply of opportunities and options we went through. But remember, inside each one of these versions is actually exactly the same engineering and parte of architecture. So when I say these previous versions here, you see that there was a competition, a version, another one, all these different opportunities looked into and studied in order to come to a place where we felt that the client was finally at a point where we could get the government and the planning authorities over the line. One of our inspirations for this park design was these kind of flow diagrams. These are critical flow diagrams. This one here represents basically the China's CO2 emissions in 2005. This would be a much larger document now, because in 2022, I think that there's been a significant growth, and we're looking at peaking in 2030, and drawing all this back down to zero. So ultimately what happens in this diagram is that those right-hand end elements, those passive systems that come out, all get bigger, and that the big item here, coal comes down and oil comes down as we move forward. That pattern really drove us to think about this kind of master plan of the park, an integrated vision for the future, because the building we were challenging the client about, and it's a big challenge in China. It's a big enough challenge here, is to get a client to understand that the building doesn't finish at the site boundary. The building is in a context. We have workers coming to the building, we have visitors, we're using energy, we're using water, we're pushing water out. Our idea was, if we could think about this project as a part of the context and not as a single site, we would be able to better explore and explain how the urban design principles that are very well understood in China, like linear parks and connectivity between areas and identities, would be something that we could actually weave into the story of this building. So where we're located is in Shanghai, and you can see in that central map in here, we're located sort of slightly north and west of Pudong, Puxi, which everybody sort of recognizes as Shanghai, and that's the heart of it all. That's where M on the Bund was, so we're in this a segment of a linear park, and one of the opportunities that we discovered in here when we looked at the surrounding kind of city is that we had 3 major schools right next door to us. So these schools were ultimately places that we thought we could start to draw the community into what we were doing here, that we could bring these residential kind of journeys into and through our parkland that we were doing here as an educational and as even a productive nature. So this idea of ecological complexity, of this kind of woven landscape, and of coming back to these ideas of journeys was really something that drove us to think about this as almost a painted landscape. And there's thousands and thousands of years of tradition of incredible gardens and journeys and quite highly structured landscape metaphors and allegories that are in the Chinese mind and in the Chinese history. Suzhou, where we did that original project in China, has 98% of the World Heritage List of gardens in the world inside this kind of like tiny city. For us, that painted landscape really drove us to thinking about how do we create this kind of interwoven, overlapped, and ultimately kind of living ecology that would be inspired by the scale and the kind of journeys of those Chinese gardens, that we could bring a myriad of species and linked landscapes together. So with water, with land, with wilderness, with farmland, with cultivated and wild planting, we'd be able to draw together really a sort of an overall strategy. And we thought about our project, which is this sort of larger kind of project here, as being simply a kind of an enhancement or a kind of a focused expression of what we were doing there. At each stage, when you're working in projects like this in China, you need to make sure that there's that your idea can become the client's idea. You have to be able to translate that idea in a way that ownership of that idea transfers, and that takes courage. You need to be ready to let your idea go, to let other people participate in it and actually understand how it's going to grow. So we imagined here a simple loop through this park that would let us bring people through a series of 7 pavilions. There was a power plaza where we were going to be able to tell children, dignitaries, family members the story of energy and solar power. A sun garden that then looked directly at solar power rather than necessarily geothermals and hydropowers and the like. We're looking then at a tech pavilion. How do we utilize data? How do we gain data? How do we measure the data from this park and the filtration of water that's going on inside it? A bamboo workshop. Bamboo is one of the most incredible rapidly renewable materials. It has a deep, deep history in China. There's a massive amount of it in cultural and construction industry over there, and far from seeing it as an olden day tool or material or like that so unsophisticated bamboo scaffolding, etc. We were really pushing to see how we could use those older, rapidly renewable materials, the crafts that we used with them, with the current CAM cutting and digital technology of lamination and material sciences, to make sure that bamboo has a role in the future. A water resilience garden. We had the great opportunity. This site and this park is located along the Honglei River. Now, river is what it's called. Drain is what it looks like. Our job here and the function of this whole park and project is ultimately to clean that waterway. So we take water out of that waterway and we push it through all of our reed bed filtration gardens and put clean water back into the river, and we explore and explain and educate people about how that works as we go through it. That water story leads to a story for a garden of amphibious life, where we start to talk about frogs, and we talk about all of the creatures that live in water and how do they live in water and how does that psychology and ecology work, and actually train people to stop thinking about water as a drain and start thinking about it as a haven. And from a haven of aquatic life, we wanted to put in a clam garden where we actually had a productive garden growing clams that were doing two things. They're both filtering water and they're also providing a food source, if not for people, then for the environment and for birds and other creatures in the space. And ultimately leading through to our building as the world's greenest building. This is a kind of a rating score that we did and explains a little bit about the kind of the number of burning hoops this project went through. If you look down here on the right, this is a kind of a Venn diagram of all of the tools that we used to rate and measure and achieve the building by. So there's LEED, there's BREEAM, there's zero water, zero waste, zero energy, zero carbon, as defined by a number of tools, both LEED and the China 3-star and the Healthy Building Code. So China 3-star is the Chinese native green star rating tool, and Healthy Building is another one of those kind of aspects, a little bit like green star versus neighbors. So LEED and WELL and BREEAM, China 3-star, Healthy Building. You can see here all of the points that we're achieving, the points that we're targeting, and the points that we are looking to secure put us well and truly above where we are here in the Pixel building. Pixel has got 105 points out of a possible 110 in LEED. This building has been designed at this stage to achieve 108 points in LEED version 4. Well, version 2, 100 points, and I don't want to get too deep into the detail here because I don't know how many of you are sort of au fait with all of this, but I can assure you there are thousands and thousands of pages of this stuff, and most of it would make your eyes water. The overarching principles, however, is you see here a section through the building is obviously in any building, it's making sure that your thermal envelope, your facade, the skin of your building is performing and harvesting and interfacing with that environmental context around you. So we challenged the client to go down the Passive House energy achievement rating, because we knew that that's a globally leading standard of low energy use. And if we could achieve that with an airtight building, that we would be massively on our way towards achieving all of the energy and the kind of airtightness points that we needed. So, you know, this kind of principle of a central atrium, of staggered floors in order to improve daylight penetration and drive and internal communication. There's an auditorium space with an amphitheater above, series of garden terraces, and an underfloor air distribution system like we have here in the Pixel building. With then the use through this atrium of cross-laminated timber and cross-laminated bamboo as the structural system for the roofs and stairs. We're really trying in here to remind the client that sustainability is not just a moment in time. It's actually something that needs to be built, owned, operated, and maintained in order to do this. So One of the first things that you do when you're trying to do this is you design the most efficient building that you can, and you then work out how much energy you're able to create on site. We initially looked at doing an entirely on-site energy building. It's moved forward from there now, as you are allowed to in the rules, and we've distributed and taken advantage of some solar panel shading through that major park that we saw before, which gives us a little bit more of an energy budget. So we were looking at the time at 525 kilowatts of PV being established on the roof and the facade being a very key part of that, generating about 40% of our available energy. So that was translating into an energy budget of about 53 kilowatt hours per meter squared per annum. So in order to work to an energy budget, you have to make sure that you're essentially trying to understand how you managing the energy use on site, and obviously tailoring it to that. And I'll get into a little bit of that in a minute. Zero water is a critical element there. Zero water here being, we wanted to be able to harvest rainwater we captured purely on our building to fund our building. We've done it here in the Pixel building, and we designed it here to work on Pixel on a very, very tiny site. We're at about a 240 odd square meter site, and we've got more like a sort of 1,000 square meter site there. Is about making sure that you catch as much as you can, but that you use as little as possible, so that we're using vacuum water, vacuum toilet systems. We're using a lot of grey water treatment systems. We're returning water as we have to in quite a few of the rating tools, returning that water to the environment cleaner than when it landed on our building, and lots of measurements and water consumption strategies. It affects the way that you use your energy systems, because you don't use water in your cooling towers. You need to use air chillers rather than water chillers, and there's a lot of kind of components to that. But a big part of it is also making those stories visible to the occupants in the project. Zero waste. Zero waste, I think, is as a tool that has quite a lot of room to grow. It's still very much about making sure that you send what you don't use to the right places to be reused. We've really tried to make sure that the building and the construction company that is building it understands that we need to offsite as much as we can, so that that control on waste is much more sophisticated. Absolutely having no idea how long we're into this, but probably needing to get a bit of a wriggle on. This is a view of the building. It's developed a little bit from here because you know, these things happen, but this is what we've got approval to share at the moment. And so you can see that this building has got a series of quite articulated triangles on the facade, and I'm going to talk about the facade a little bit here because it's such an important part, both visually and also at an energy and information level. The facade is really a mix of solar panel elements built into these triangular frames, of triple glazed window units, essentially ensuring that we have a clear thermal line to the project. And we've, in those clear units, included a clear view film, which is a solar film generation, trying to obviously test and explore the technologies that exist today and push them to the limits of where we can go. What's interesting in the facade is that there's a series of competing requirements. We know that we need to maximize the solar energy that we're gaining off that facade, but we also, in order to score all of the points that we have on indoor air quality and indoor environmental quality, we need to maximize the daylight penetration into the project and into the building, and also maintain connection to nature and views to the outside. And so what we did was, in generating this idea of the triangular facade, we were able to make sure that the upper elements, the triangles that have their base at the top with their peak at the bottom, were all dedicated to daylight, and that the triangles with their larger section at the bottom and the peak at the top were all dedicated to solar. And we were then orientating those so that we would harvest and capture the maximum amount of light possible. We had very strict controls on our window to wall ratio, and that obviously drove some efficiency and some need for solar and daylight performance. But what we found overall is that there were a number of panels that started to perform really substantially better than other panels in their orientations. Obviously, to the north, sun coming from the south, there was not a lot of solar power gained, but we found that even a slight inclination due to what was essentially a very white sky and a very bright sky led us to actually generate a reasonably substantial proportion of our energy from that section of the facade. We originally designed these elements to be fabricated potentially in a steel section, and we pushed that forward and got that into a cross-laminated bamboo profile. But these are the shapes of those panels and mega panels, everything fabricated off-site, fully sealed, and delivered and offered up onto the building in its full capacity. And you can see here these living edge garden planters that sit at the bottom of each of these elements that are both for our grey water recycling system and also for the creation of microclimates to keep our solar panels cool, to keep birds and insects fed and to essentially improve the indoor quality. Here in the Pixel building, it's one of the things we like the most, is that all the way around the outside of our office at our floor is a garden bed that has birds and ponds and rocks and all sorts of native grasses growing in that strategy. So we spent a significant amount of time well over and above the part for which we were being paid in a kind of an R&D exploration with the Shanghai Construction Group and their facade delivery team as to how we would modify, modulate, prefabricate, and bring these panels to site so that we could massively reduce the amount of CO2 embedment, that we could massively improve the performance, and that we could absolutely reduce the on-site installation time that we took these panels through. There are a number of kind of key panels. There's a full height fixed vision. There was then a vision glass that had an operable portion to it. And then there was a spandrel panel that had a back pan and our clear view solar on that. And then obviously an insulated solid solar panel. When you look at how all of these work together, this kind of natural ventilation that you also are required to have, we first investigated this through the window itself, because there was a very funny rule in one of the Chinese codes that presumed historically that ventilation would come through windows. And so we had to spend quite a substantial amount of time, and this is probably true of a lot of components in the project, really drilling into the definitions of what the codes were asking us to do. For example, you can have ventilation into a building through a non-glazed opening and it's still air from the outside, but the theory and the perception of it being air from the outside because it was coming through a window that you could see was open was something we spent a lot of time, I'll say it, arguing about, because obviously opening a window in a passive house building and bringing in all of the pollutants and the kind of the dust and the smell and the noise and also the humidity actually generated energy increases in the building, not energy decreases. And when we did a massive study on the right temperature and right humidity, Shanghai only seemed to sit in that world for about an hour and a half a year, where you could open the windows cleanly, there'd be no fire outside, the smoke would be gone, it would be better. We, of course, had to concede that that would hopefully be changing in the future. We weren't saying that it was going to get worse in the future, it was going to get better, but we still did have to go through the energy studies on how this energy system would work in the facade if we were to break that facade and bring natural ventilation through there. So what happened when we got to the digital mock-up for the physical mock-ups, we modeled up a section of the building that we wanted them to build as a prototype. And in that, what we got them to do was to look both at a vision ventilation, but also you see here, we then updated this to actually have a filtered, closable, insulated, operable panel for ventilation behind the solar unit so that air would actually be drawn across the landscape bed rather than through a window. and could be automated by the building, so that when the temperatures were right and the humidities were right, those elements could be opened and operated, and looking at how much open area we would get through that, and running CFD analysis on those proposals, refining products and colors, looking at some higher efficiency solar, looking at some blue solars, and then ultimately doing a services study to understand what the installation was like on each of these components. So essentially backing up our energy budget by displaying all of the tools that we'd used to really explore and explain how much solar we were getting from each of these particular components across the projects. And then obviously looking at, you know, what's the net effect, what's the looking like, and are we in the ballpark on systems and on types. We managed to get this down to about 4 kinds of facade element that we could assemble into our mega panels, and so there was some real efficiency that was realized in that in the factory timing. What's in the building? Well, the building's essentially an office building, but on the first floor, you see there's a second floor as the first kind of offices, and then this exterior garden space. On the third floor, which is really 3 and 3M, we again have these open plan offices, and there's a series of executive offices. The toilets are clustered here around this element, and this is the lift core. And then these floor plates really stack up through here till we get to the level 4 productive garden and the level 5 office. And above that, we've got our plant room and solar and roof atrium. So to take you back down to the ground, obviously visitors, reception, VIP meeting rooms, being able to make sure that everyone's journey is really close, is really easily navigable to elevators, to the M1 terraces, up through our Tangram terrace that takes us on a bit of a discovery journey. This Tangram terrace is really a space for gathering and for groups to have photographs, but it's also full of the data screens telling everybody about what's happening in the building as part of that educational journey. That this is both point 1 and point 7 when you go out through the park. Everybody comes to the building, they walk up the Tangram terrace, and they go through the they walk up that Tangram terrace, and then at level 2 there's a series of kind of interactive education spaces before you go out the rear door here and down the landscape and out into the park. So workstations and office connectivity, as we were describing before through this atrium, we had just finished doing the interior fit out for John Holland here in Melbourne for their new headquarters. Obviously now it's owned by CCCC, the Chinese company as well. And we did a lot of working groups with them to understand how we could understand and do the org charts and the kind of the network charts between what was ultimately the 3 organizations that were going to be testing this building. And so we worked out how we could get those organizations distributed across this atrium so that we could really get everybody not using the elevators, which is a part of the challenge of good design, but rather taking this kind of continuous circular sort of looping journey down through this atrium, through the main staircases that lead you and connect you up and down. This atrium also works as the main thermal exhaust for the whole building so that we can recirculate the air, take out the heat through the heat exchangers at the top, or the cools, and send that back into the supply air. So obviously working spaces, offices, the executive offices, and really sophisticated, sustainable locating of meeting rooms and breakout spaces so that we could build that flexibility in, because we don't want lots of cellular offices and we don't want all open plan offices. We need a really interesting hybrid mix of these kind of bookable spaces that engage with the communities that you are sort of building into the walkarounds of. Choosing great furniture is always important, and there's some fantastic opportunities in furniture and the fit out that's been delivered more and more because of the demand for high rated buildings. And I know that any designers out there will know that, you know, vegan leather and super sophisticated recycled materials, and even like carpet, Interface, another great Australian company, has managed to push itself into carbon positivity by by setting a target for carbon neutrality and recycling all of their old carpets and coming back and maintaining a supply chain command across elements is really good. I'm going to keep going pretty fast. This is one of the library spaces in the building that really is, it's at that level 2 mezzanine. It's designed very much as this kind of not just a cafe library space where staff and their visitors can come and gather and relax and you know, kind of detox a little if you want in between working sessions. And it's extremely required in the Chinese working culture to authorize and empower staff to take those moments out, creating meeting rooms that feel like they're informal, that they're relaxation spaces, that they're connected to gardens and not simply to the tasks of work is actually really important to break down that kind of rigidity that can come to bear on some offices. Some focused booths and helping the client understand that furniture strategies are not just about finding one chair and spreading it all around. We were required as part of the tools and the rating tool overlap to provide a plethora of amenity space to the offices. There's gymnasiums, there's dance spaces, meditation rooms, there's an outdoor sports track, there's running areas, and there's a maternity and infant playroom. So all of these areas have been built into a journey that is really designed to start as you arrive. We gathered all of those journeys from both the bicycle arrival and the visitor arrival to bring you in through the bicycle store and repair room, to take you then through into the gymnasium, to link to the dance room, and then come through into the change rooms, which are all obviously, you know, kind of running off recycled and potable waters that have been gathered and harvested. There's green walls and green spaces across all of the elements. Our running track was a challenge to get a 200 linear meter running track on the site without reducing our green area space. You always have these competing demands. And so what we did was we elevated the track up so that we could actually have it concurrently above itself, and thereby only lose the running track's width for approximately, you know, half of the running track rather than all of the running track. And so these spaces which are on the site but we have no fences for are still key components of making sure that we're achieving the kind of the livability and kind of amenity outcomes that we're looking for. And there are some great precedents, some particularly hoopy running tracks that this is in China. And so one of the things, if you're looking to try and change the rules in China, is find where in China it's been changed before, because that gives people great succor that there's a pathway and that there's hope for that innovation. Unlike Singapore, where innovation needs to have been done 5 times before, proven to make a profit and be ideally next to you, you can find opportunities from quite regional and disparate parts and blend those things together into comprehensive solutions that do more than any of those one parts might do by itself. So there's obviously a pretty funky little auditorium that we've got that can house 166 people. It has its own independent HVAC system. Sometimes you have to have these kind of like high performance, high efficiency systems here, because if you have a room that's completely empty and then you put 166 people into it for 1 hour and then they all leave again, you can't expect the thermal profile to maintain itself, because we are each of us a 1500 kilowatt kind of, you know, battery throwing off quite a lot of heat. So the things we do in there is we make sure that that auditorium is lit by way of skylights that come through the amphitheater above, and that provides ample light. There are controllable blinds in here, obviously, so that you can do projections. The cafeteria is a double height space and actually was excised out of the passive house thermal line, because kitchens need massive exhaust systems going on them. We made this much more of a naturally ventilated space so that we could open the doors, we could have this space with an airlock control to the remainder of the office, so that the food smells and kitchen smells and cooking smells and ultimately quite a lot of noise didn't break into the main office building itself. And so you see there a sort of a a marker here. One of the most interesting things about the kitchen space and the cafeteria was that we drove the client to really understand this kind of food, this kind of zero food miles. So zero food miles as a strategy is how can we grow as much as we need on the site, not only to feed our staff in a vegetarian kitchen, but perhaps to be able to accept some additional goods from the outside, or produce some preserves or chutneys or take-home meals so that staff could come here, contribute to the kitchen time, and actually take food back home to feed the family, or to do some of that componentry when you move into a surplus. So there's a really interesting cycle that we can start to connect people to. And so our level 4 plan, as required in one of the codes, has about 250 square meters of vegetable productive garden beds that needs to be grown and can be used as both educational opportunities, but also really, really functional vegetarian garden and food production spaces. That food strategy led us into an idea about the landscape, where we were really interested in trying to create a dialogue between the idea of cultivation and wilderness, and that the landscape around our project, we wanted to really blur the boundary of the site with. And so what we started to do was create these kind of geometries that come back to that park geometry, where our landscapes start to drive you into an adventure of both geometry and planting and the kind of the performance of it. So our productive garden space that you see here at level 4 is quite a wildly planted component where the productive garden itself is planted like a wilderness. So we don't have rows of all the same vegetables. We actually have the productive garden all mixed up a bit. And we then actually took the wild landscape, the grasses and the plants that are not productive, and we planted those in cultivated rows to try and sort of make people reconceive of the idea that not only is this food, plants are food not just for humans. Plants are actually part of that ecological cycle and connect you to the world. And so really, landscape is a thread that we tried to run through the whole project, where we're very interested in establishing the orientations of the architecture in the land and in the tree lines, as you saw from those early park describers, but also drawing that greenery into the building. And so the entirety of the atrium, including the stairs and the balcony edges and all of the balustrades, is planted both as a water filtration system, but also as a biophilia kind of connection, a linkage to what's going on. And the plants that we intend to grow in here, seasonal plants, they go through changes. They're clearly indoor plants, but they're also in a nice big open environment and really link you into the building that you're going up and down through. You can see here some of the early sketch details on how those planter beds would be built up. We were very interested in using a GRC component that would be the exterior kind of form there that we could offsite manufacture. The staircases, we went through a lot of R&D to build those staircases in cross-laminated timber using technologies that have been developed here in Victoria by XLAM and other kind of great kind of mass timber engineering companies, and about really about sort of minimizing the risk and maintenance on building these garden systems into the project. This plan here shows that sort of journey of the visitor coming up through the tangram, going then through this is now not these offices, but this kind of discovery center. This is the library, then coming out this garden and going out and looking through the rest of the park. This is really a sort of an integrated section of landscape designed to draw people in and house the maternity ward section there. And the Chinese, if they're good at anything, they're great at landscapes and gardens. The gardens in China, as I mentioned before, in Suzhou, they are some extraordinary spaces. And so being able to authorize the kind of the ability to see these gardens as bringing sustainability, as bringing peace of mind, as bringing harmony into the workplace is really important for us. So that tangram terrace has beside it here a series of waterfalls and pools, so that we fill this atrium with that kind of white noise of softly falling water and trickling streams. These noises and these sounds are positive acoustic maskings that you can put up in order to perhaps hide the sound of the day-to-day business, the telephones and people talking. When you're in that space that has that kind of environmental audio sphere attached to it, you feel very different. This tall space is also now obviously a space that we're very interested in building the most kind of ecological kind of spaces. I would love nothing more than to be able to have butterflies in here flittering around and, you know, being part of the atmosphere and the life that we're working through. And, you know, the grand tradition of green walls, there's a lot of beautiful opportunities to do those projects. So for us, this Zero Plus project really tries to represent a new way of building, of embedding technology, but even more of celebrating life in that challenging century. So we're pretty thrilled about the opportunity to have worked on and explored and sort of done a lot of the R&D to make this real. And I guess I'm really, you know, kind of open to questions now.
Oh, Dylan, that's fantastic. We could have another half an hour of this. It's just absolutely enthralling, and I think all our people online would agree that the skill that you've displayed and the level of detail is really awe-inspiring. And I think the sensitivities that you display as well. And I think really architectural diplomacy is something that's not really acknowledged. We talk about sports diplomacy and arts diplomacy, but this is an incredible a bridge or a platform for cultural exchange. So congratulations, it's just wonderful, a great presentation. We're really running right up to the wire, but I have a couple of quick questions. Do you see collaborations in China on climate as an area of growth for your company? And this is from Anthony Coles, who's heading up our Green Channel initiative at ACBC.
Look, absolutely, massively. I think that there is such significant investment and momentum in China to change things. We have an opportunity to take everything that we've learned in our kind of Western thinking to accelerate and help China leapfrog perhaps phases that we're still trying to get through. We here in Australia have worse planning and building and energy controls than they have available to them in China. And the one thing that China, as I was saying earlier, like if we can design one building that changes the world, the rules that we build all the buildings by in China, then I think we're onto something. And in China, when they decree something shall be, it is done. And unlike here, where our regulation and our market are very limp pieces of you know, celery forcing us to be better, and we have a mighty dollar running us, there is ample opportunity to assist China to change the rules and to take the lead. And if we're not partners with them on that, then we'll be buying what they're doing. And I want to be a partner and a maker with them, not a follower.
Yeah, and I think that goes for the same for many sectors. So that's a wonderful note to finish on. I'm sorry we are 1 minute over, and we probably should close now. But Dylan, that's been absolutely awe-inspiring. Thank you so much. Really delighted, and you're a very valuable member of ACBC and have been for many years. So we appreciate you speaking to us today.
Pleasure.
Absolutely wonderful. We have a few other, obviously, sectors that we cover, many sectors. We've got an education roundtable coming up on international education on the 4th of August. We've got a second event in our decarbonisation roundtable working with ANU, which will be discussing green steel, hydrogen and battery minerals, which is organised from our West Australian branch, and you can watch that via live stream. We've got an event on future-proofing your business on the 9th of August, which will also include blockchain, net zero and social license. So hopefully a lot of you will be interested to join that. And as you're aware, we do have a quick survey at the end, if you can stay for a second and just answer our questions, because we do remain steadfast in our commitment to help our members to navigate and prosper within the Australia-China relationship, and your feedback always goes into our considerations when
there's one question that's been asked.
Yes.
Please discuss what might be the challenges with working with Chinese construction companies when building with a requirement to meet such ambitious challenges.
Yeah. Do you want to
Oh boy, where do I start? First and foremost, one of the hardest things that we've had to deal with is not being able to travel, not being able to be in the room, because there is so much nuance and momentum you build in a presentation that is instantly finished when you turn the computer off. And being in the room and speaking what is ultimately an international language of energy, engineering, architecture. One of my favorite clients in China, he speaks no English. I speak so little Chinese, it's not even worth, you know, shuling shengtao is all I can basically say, which is practice makes perfect, and some other bits. But anyway, we don't need a translator because he's trained as an architect and I'm trained as an architect, and we draw and we know exactly what we're talking about. So being in the room is one of the most important. The next one, of course, is that it's the reason that we have value in China is that we can think outside of the squares and boxes that they do. And our challenge is to help them understand how to get there without being radical, without it being a major shift. So I was talking before about sometimes there are examples that you can find all through China. You find the award-winning robotics company in Shanghai, Robotics AI Plus. You find them and you work with them on a piece of bamboo that's coming from a laminated bamboo man who's building some garden sheds, and you bring them together with a fire engineer from America who's a Chinese-American fire engineer. And you help them all understand that the science exists. We've just got to bring it all together. And when you lay it all up, yes, it's compliant. Yes, it meets the code. Yes, we might need to change people's minds. Like, is air coming through a solid panel the same as air coming through a glazed panel? Yes, it is. It doesn't need to be a window. And it's when you see those moments of enlightenment that you go, right, we can do this because this is the argument we're putting forward. We're not saying we want to break a rule. We're saying we want to improve it. And improving rules is actually the best way you can change that resistance to compliance.
Oh, that's terrific, and it really talks for politics as well, because if we can work together in that manner, so that's just terrific, Dylan. So thank you so much. To all of you online, if you're not members, please join up, because we do have an extensive program, and sessions like this are just absolutely invaluable. So thank you all very much for joining us. I'm sorry we've gone 5 minutes over, but it's been highly worthwhile. Dylan, thanks again. Nick, up in
No worries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick, and good luck in Shanghai.
Yeah. Zach
Chengdu.
And Zach online, who's been pushing all the buttons, looking after everything. So well done, everyone, and have a lovely day, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.